Sear, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Sear is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Sear.
All right, guys, welcome to the Pro Physique Code. Today we are going to talk about the standard. I think we'll focus mostly on the bikini division, but I think we can touch on the standards for a couple different divisions and like what those mean and how to address them. And how do we define certain terms and how do we obtain that look, and then how to figure out how to adjust. We'll talk about all these things as a competitor, as a coach. And before we get too far, we have opened up registration for the Dallas event. So at the Texas Pro in August, we're having I think we're limiting it to 35 people. It's on Sunday and it's after the Texas Pro at the Hidden Gym. So we're going to be doing a full prep, talking about training, nutrition, peaking, and also hands-on posing and training stuff. So, yeah, last year it sold out and we added five seats. So
yeah, I feel like 35 seats, I feel like that's going to sell out quickly too. So if you're listening to this, definitely hop on that if you want to come. And I don't think, and like, it's not limited to active competitors. So if you're just interested in competing in general, come
any phase.
learn.
Never competed, you're a pro, you just want to learn, whatever it is, we'll address topics. Diraj is going to be there. Congratulations. I'm sure everyone knows by now.
Yes.
Big congratulations.
Daraja is going to be a mama, so we're all very excited for her.
I know. That is really exciting. Very excited for her. Well, I'm excited to dive into this topic because I think you guys probably both agree that, well, for us, we do this is our job, right? So I think sometimes we forget that some people, especially people who are newer into competing, don't realize that there is a specific standard that every division, but we're going to specifically hone in on bikini, that every division has, right? So it's not just, okay, who steps on stage and has the coolest looking physique, right? There is definitely some criteria that we want to cover here, just so you guys know, what you need to be working towards in order to fit that criteria and be judged accordingly.
Yeah, I think I hear it all the time when people go to shows. What are they looking for? They don't know what they want. This girl's better. That guy's better. This person's leaner. And I think especially as a coach, I call them coach's goggles. You get so fixated on your own clients that you can kind of start to see their highlights and none of their flaws. And obviously, hey, there's Pearl. And obviously, if you see like your friends, people you're familiar with, it can kind of change your perspective. And so I think that it can make it difficult to have a kind of biased look at people. But you do get better at it over time. I even will call myself out on my coach's goggles sometimes. So
it happens. It happens to all of us, and especially when we see changes, we see where they come from and we think what they're going to look like on stage. We have a picture of that in our mind. And when they look good on stage, and the truth is we focus on our athletes, right?
Now,
our athletes.
Lexi, why don't you, because you have the NPC rules up, so we can break that down initially and go into that.
Yeah, so I'll read over this. So this comes directly from NPC News online. This is what they have defined as the criteria. So we'll start with the criteria for judging female physiques is broken out into 4 different categories. So muscularity, condition, symmetry and balance, and presentation, aka posing. So for bikini in particular, so they have 2 sections. So I'll start with what bikini athletes should display. And again, this is per the NPC website. So bikini athletes should display a foundation of muscle, which gives shape to the female body, full round glutes with a slight separation between the hamstring and the glute area, small amount of roundness in the delts, conditioned core, and overall look, hair, makeup, suit, and tan. And then getting into what bikini athletes should not display is muscular density seen in a figure physique, squared glutes, muscle separation seen in figure competitors, graininess, and striations.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at the winners of the bigger shows, it shows you that. Like when you look at, you know, Jennifer Dory winning the Olympia, that basically just fit that criteria perfectly.
Mhm.
Where we can kind of have trouble sometimes is you'll see competitors that have striations or have some graininess win shows, but it's because they fit the criteria better than anybody else that day, despite that like flaw. But when they get into the lineups with the higher caliber, you probably see that more and more at the lower levels, right? At the NPC, I think a good example was Holly Baxter at the Pittsburgh Pro. She won the NPC show. I think she was a little overly muscular and a little overly conditioned for the bikini division, but she also fit the criteria very well. Looked fantastic. So, you know, I think there are times when you might look at a show and go, oh, that person's too shredded, but they still fit the criteria the best.
Yeah, that is a great point. I'm glad you bring that up because you do see that at more of the just smaller, like regional shows. You may see somebody that wins and you may think, okay, well, they look really muscular or they do have muscle separation, but it's hard if you weren't there in person. You know, you have to realize the judges can only judge what is there that day, and they're going to reward the person that fits the criteria the best. Now, that doesn't mean that that person necessarily fits the criteria perfectly, but they are just what fit the criteria best that day. So that's a great example, Paul, from
Well,
this past weekend for sure.
so I like this idea. You basically stated all the categories. Let's go one by one and discuss them. And so we can give some like real world examples.
Yeah. So let's start with okay. So, what bikini athletes? Do you want to start with what bikini athletes should display or what they shouldn't
Yeah. And I
display?
think the first one you said was muscularity, correct?
Yeah, so the first thing that it says that bikini athletes should display is a foundation of muscle, which gives shape to the female body.
So, Evan, I know you're working with a couple girls right now that are trying to bring up their
Mhm.
muscularity. So, how do you define a base of muscle?
A base of muscle, it's all just, I think it's based off people's height and weight with that. I think the glutes being in line with the shoulders is important with that. Nothing sticking out, nothing being too overly developed, but everything being there. Bikini is one of those divisions that you have to have an eye for it and you have to have been around it for a while to really understand it. I think it's the only division that's really like that. And a base of muscle is different for each person. You know, if you're a taller person, then sometimes that base of muscle is going to be a quite bit more than maybe someone that's a little bit on the shorter side of things. I think that it's about you never want to be so lean that you're stringy. I think this is a good way to think about it. If you are so lean and you look stringy, then you don't have enough muscle yet.
Yeah.
That's probably a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I think when
Mhm.
I think of base of muscle, it doesn't have to come from bodybuilding. I think a lot of really good bodybuilders come into the sport and they already have really well developed legs from soccer or track or
Mhm.
you know, another sport like that, or maybe they have really good developed upper bodies from something like that too, and then the lower body's got to catch up. Um, but I think you have to see development in every muscle group, right? There can't
Yeah.
be it's not somebody walking in off the street that just started training. This is, you know, athletes that have a good, you know, and there are advantages to certain genetic, you know, muscle insertions and muscle fiber types where some people can get away with a little bit less muscle because they have such great shape and they have great muscle insertions, and some people have to overcome that by putting on more muscle. But it is impressive to look up on the stage and see a girl that is muscular, right? You don't want to just you want to see the fullness to the shoulders. You want to see the fullness to the glutes. When I was coaching, you know, gosh, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I remember I used to define the division as big glutes, pretty face, and great shoulders. Now that's not the case. Your legs have to match. You can't just have thin legs and big glutes. And I think for a while, it was pretty common for people to have almost like overdeveloped glutes that didn't match.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think bikini, like when it comes to muscularity, everything needs to be very, very balanced. It is cool when you see a girl off stage with, oh, she's got really big quads or really big shoulders. Okay, yeah, that's cool off stage, but if you see a bikini athlete on stage and you're just naturally like gravitating towards one specific muscle because it's so overpowering and dominant, that's not really what the criteria is based upon. You want to have lots of balance, lots of symmetry, lots of shape. It shouldn't be overwhelming muscularity, but like you said, Paul, it's not. I feel like maybe like when the division first started, it was a little bit more. It was a lot less muscle, and you could get away with not having as much of a training history. But now, I mean, most of the time, the girls that are doing or who are most successful on stage have years and years and years of lifting background, and a lot of them come from athletic backgrounds too. Not saying you have to, but like I know Ashley Kay, for example, I think she was like a big track star before she even got into lifting, right? So a lot of competitors do have those athletic backgrounds as well.
Yeah, so I know, Evan, you're training Carla, who
Mhm.
has a lot of muscle, just not necessarily in the right place. So talk a little bit about how training can kind of impact that.
Yeah, so I do have a client. Her name's Carla. She came to me. She had a powerlifting background, and a really good squatter, and has huge quads, like really, really big quads. So our goal has been downsizing the quads, upping the glutes, and adding to her shoulders. The the issue with having a very overdeveloped muscle group is it tends to take over in a lot of things that you do. So part of us has been, her learning how to activate her glutes, especially in things like hip thrusts without activating her quads. And it's got to the point too with her that we had to pretty much pull out anything that even activated her quads for a long, long time. But it's about trying to structure the programming and structure the food around what we need to bring up. Um, Similar, like in adding muscle to certain groups and pulling away muscle from certain groups, all comes from activation and programming. It really, really does. And it comes from training how you need to train, not how you want to train. That is two very, very different things. For her, she needed to fall in love with training upper body and shoulders. She needed to fall in love with that. And she has. And if anyone's seen her pictures, her shoulders are literally twice as big as they were last year at this point. And it's also about being realistic too, because our goal with her is to bring her on stage and blow people's minds with that. And for that, we still need more glutes, and so that's why we're taking the time we need to bring that up. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, well put.
You
I
said
think,
You said something really good there too, Evan, that I want to just like pinpoint the fact that when you are in the sport, it's a matter of training how you need to train, not necessarily how you want to train, right? Because it is a very aesthetic based sport. And I can imagine, like with Carla, if she came from a powerlifting background, it's sometimes hard to switch gears, right? Because that's a very performance based sport, right?
Mhm.
Whereas bodybuilding, complete opposite, right? And I'm sure that that's been a little bit of a hard kind of rewiring of the brain. And I know, I know that there are some bikini pros out there that are told like, that they need to stop growing or they need to downsize a specific area. And then that requires them to literally stop training that muscle group in particular. And then they only train lower body or upper body. And so this sport is really big on training how you need to train in order to bring up certain areas, bring down certain areas, and furthermore, fit the criteria.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I think,
another thing too that comes from performance backgrounds is people typically think more is better. And with her and with some of my athletes, it's like you have to dial that back and say, okay, this is a little too much here. This is too much intensity. This is too much work without taking recovery. So it's about trying to teach that portion of it too. And knowing that you can't literally go to failure every single set of every single movement every single time because you will literally never recover.
yeah. I mean, that's also where, obviously we're talking about professional bodybuilders. So there are times where competitors are on performance enhancing drugs that can change the amount of work that they can handle. And that's something that, some competitors are going to be interested, some aren't. So that's also going to take into consideration, how much training and how proper. So that's called coaching. That's where, you get involved in that aspect of it and you can learn, okay, what is a client's goals? How are we going to approach this? But adding muscle, there's not just one way to do it. But I love that you said time, Evan, because the thing that you notice about Ashley Kaltwasser, right? she doesn't have to take a lot of time off from stage. And I think a lot of competitors can get butthurt by that, thinking, oh, she competes too frequently. But once you are the criteria, she doesn't need to spend a lot of time in the gym. In fact, that could hinder her. If she took a year off and was training hard, she might come back and be out of the criteria. So once you develop that, you don't have to take as much time off. So that's another great point about competing. Probably competing less frequently earlier in your career will allow you to compete with more frequency later in your career, and have more success, at least in the bikini division. You know, the other divisions that are constantly evolving. I know, Evan, like the way you looked last year at Hurricane blew away the look that you had when you turned pro and did Tampa. However, the whole division blew up. So it was like you took 2 steps forward, and I feel like that show took 3. It was like, wow, these guys look crazy. Like you made your old self look like an amateur, but now you're also in lineups where like, okay, these men are acting like men. They are putting on muscle. So the bikini division, there are limitations. You can't just, you can definitely outgrow it. And we see that with some competitors that have to take some time off and pull back. So yeah, for muscularity, my favorite way to describe it is everything has to match. Your glutes have to match your quads, your hamstrings, and your shoulders. If you look at a competitor up on stage and your eye goes to one body part, that is not ideal because it's too small or too big, right? And that's really how you have to design the training to make sure that that is going to happen. Now, for most competitors, glutes and shoulders are probably the weak points. But you know, there are times with competitors where they got to bring up their quads or they got to bring up their hamstrings.
Yeah. And I think lats too is sometimes overlooked in bikini because we think, oh, well, the back isn't judged in bikini. You're not moving your hair off your back. But if you don't have a nice like taper in the lats, it tends to throw off that overall symmetry and balance. And it kind of just makes a competitor's frame look very straight up and down, right? So even though you're not moving your hair off your back in NPC, at least, still, you know, I find that a lot of competitors that I have, at least, we're training their lats to just create more of that upper body shape and structure.
Yeah, especially in the front pose, especially. Now, what was the next criteria?
Okay, so next one is full round glutes with a slight separation between the hamstring and glute area.
Yeah, this is
So,
probably in years past, like the word tie-in, that was a word I did not have in my vocabulary when I was competing. Now that is all you hear. Like, do you have a tie-in? Can I see my tie-ins? Coach, when am I going to see my tie-ins? There's a couple things that come to play there. A, muscle size, but I think even more than that sometimes is the insertion of the glute. People don't realize how different that can be. You know, it can insert way down the hamstring, or it can insert really up high. If it inserts really up high, they might have a bubble butt in their front pose, but no tie-in in the back pose, right? And they might look great until they diet down, and then they diet down, and you realize there's no, I call it like the almond. You want like big and full at the top and down to a pretty little point. That's when you look at the Olympia, that's what those girls typically have. They're big and full at the top, and it just kind of tapers right into their leg. And it just comes to a nice point.
Yeah, and we're talking about like base of muscle too. That's a good way to look at that as well. As a base of muscle is, you have to have a base of muscle in your glute and a good base of muscle to be able to have good round full glutes and a tie-in that's not completely etched in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, a great point to your point, Paul, a second ago, is the insertion. I feel like, I mean, that's very genetic based, but I mean, just look at like thinking back to Pittsburgh this past weekend. I mean, look at like somebody like India Polino. She has a very, very long tie-in, like a very long insertion, compared to somebody like Ashley Kay, who has a little bit of a shorter insertion and more of like that bubbly roundness, right? They both fit the criteria very well, but they have completely different insertions. So you see the insertion being something that is very different person to person. But yeah, where the glute kind of meets the hamstring, like you said, like that almond shape, that's what we're talking about when we're referring to like the glute ham tie-in.
Well, yeah, and even you know, I think back, if you guys have a memory like I do, Marcia Goncalves, she had her glutes inserted on the outside of her leg, so it was like the tie-in was actually outside of the quad. It was, you know, so they were like, you know, if you took the glute and turned it a little bit sideways, so that gave her a very unique look. She always came in very conditioned, and it was very cool to see. So like, yeah, the glutes can have such unique looks to them. And that's going to really probably determine how you should train, how much muscle you need to have there. You know, so yeah, I think muscularity of the glutes used to be, I mean, literally, we would all just wait for the show to turn around. You would see some girls up there and be like, oh man, her front pose is killer. Turn around, two different competitors. You're like, wait, where'd she go? She disappeared. So that's literally how the bikini division works, I swear. Like at national shows and, you know, these bigger lineups, you see somebody that looks great and they turn them around, they turn them back. That's when they move them. They move people in and out based on that pose. And it's, you know, it's literally changed the sport. It's changed training. I mean, Brett Contreras, great friend, very passionate about muscle building, has become, you know, synonymous with building glutes because he's revolutionized training. Like I never had a client have a glute day before I heard of Brett Contreras. When I wanted a client to build glutes, it was the old fashioned, you know, deadlifts, stiff leg deadlifts, squats, hack squats, whatever targeted their glutes, lunges, things like that, you know, and then along comes Brett and now every girl has glute days, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's actually really comical for me to think back to when I first started training, and I never like had a glute day either. I mean, all I did was, I guess I just called it a leg day, but no hip thrust, no glute isolation. So yeah, it's kind of funny to see how that's evolved. But I also think it's important to mention, because I know at least I have a lot of first time competitors that they're like panicked because they're like, oh my God, I don't see my glute hamstring tie-ins, and they're not even in prep yet. And I think it's important to sometimes say that most females are not going to have a glute hamstring tie-in unless they are very close to being stage lean. Some
Oh,
people
it's the
genetically
last
have
thing.
more. Exactly, exactly. And so I think sometimes it's important to say that, because I'll have girls that are panicking. They're like, why don't I see that tie-in? But realizing that for, I would say, about 95% of competitors, that tie-in is going to be the very last thing that comes in, maybe the last few weeks leading up to a show. Some people genetically just have more of a tie-in, like at a higher percentage of body fat, but it is something that you don't see usually until you're at a very low level of body fat.
Yeah. And the more muscle you have, the easier it is to see the tie-in.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think
And I think,
for me,
oh, go for it.
yeah, like that's honestly where I'll start to push my competitors, especially like getting ready for nationals, is okay, we've really, you know, you really want to stand out in that back pose. And if you honestly, if you're not seeing the shape of the glute coming into the hamstring, you're probably not getting first call outs. Like it's just at this point, competitors are, you know, what's crazy is nowadays, like sometimes you'll see like true novices showing up like tie-ins and capped shoulders. And so like, you know, I feel like there's less competitors, but the quality is higher.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think last point on this is when it comes to like full round glutes, if you take a look at like the past couple of pro shows that there have been, so like Charlotte, Girl Power, Pittsburgh, if you really look at like the top couple of girls, you'll see that they have just this like 3D pop and dimension to their glutes compared to everybody else. And so that's kind of what they mean by like the full round, like 3D pop to the glutes in the back pose as well.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, what was the next one?
Next one is a small amount of roundness in the delts.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Because I feel like that is, I don't want to say it's not as highly genetic as calves, but your shoulder insertions are going to determine a lot of how they look on stage. I know girls that are very strong and can side lateral dumbbell raise a lot of weight, but they just, when they put their arm down, they don't have that, you know, I'm blessed. I have that kind of roundness, and Evan's blessed beyond good grief. He's all fucking boulder shoulders. Like he's got that bubble insertion. So yeah, you can add some muscle, but the cap delts, that is, you know, what's funny, Evan, I used to notice more women had it than men because men try to sling too much weight.
Yeah.
So they end up just hitting their traps when they're doing this, you know, whereas women, they always have those little pretty delts.
Yeah. It's similar to, it's insertions, right? It's short. Some people have short delt insertions. Some have long delt insertions. I have a very short delt insert. It sits right here. So it's same as like calves. I have very long calf inserts, which means that my calves look even worse than most normal people's with too. But I have very short delt inserts. So if my delt connected down here lower, it would make
Yeah.
it more elongated. The fact it is a high insert means that the muscle I put in my delt doesn't have as much space to go.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't have as much space to go, it's going to go out rather than down.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, yeah, is genetic. And when it comes to bikini too, here's one of those things that is difficult when why, structure is so important in the sport. It's that if you don't have the smallest waist in the world, then you're going to need to grow your shoulders to try to make your waist look a little
Yeah.
smaller. But then sometimes the upper body can be a little too dominant. So it's about trying to find out what that balance is between that, the posing, and just the overall look.
Yeah. That's very well defined. And Lexi, that's something you've been working on. So how's that going with you?
Going pretty well. I'm actually, funny enough. So I think most people know I got a breast augmentation like a couple years ago. So I don't train chest directly. But one of the things that I realized is that I actually was working or I was training a while ago with there was she's a wellness Olympian, and she was telling me kind of how I needed to isolate this, like the part like of my delt going into my chest to kind of help to make that pop a little bit more. So I've changed up my shoulder training a little bit, and I mean, I think it's going well. I love training shoulders, so it's probably one of my favorites.
Perfect. Yeah. I think it's pretty clear for women, shoulders are in, chest is out. Like we're not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
prescribing a lot of chest. I do try to keep
yeah,
in some either incline dumbbell or just something to engage that interior delt.
right.
But some girls are even resistant to that, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
this
you,
too, if a girl doesn't have like a breast augmentation and needs a little bit more depth through the chest, then sometimes some chest work is needed. And something like you said, Paul, like a high incline chest press can be good for that because it hits the shoulders and the chest at the same time. And the front delt, which is, everything that you pretty much need for bikini, but you don't want to look hollow through this area. But you also don't want to look over defined, because we've all seen the girls that get on stage and it's like just straight all the way across, and it doesn't look right either. It's about trying to find the balance. Look, programming is incredibly important in bikini. It is.
oh,
I
it
mean that can
is.
also come down to peaking. So let's get to the
Mhm.
next one. The next one was conditioning, right? I believe.
Well, the next one is so this is what bikini athletes should display, is going to be a conditioned core. So we can talk a little bit about
Yeah,
how,
that's not very clear because I've gotten feedback that my girls' cores were too tight, and I've gotten feedback that they were too soft. Both what you would say were conditioned. So that's pretty vague.
yeah, it's a loose term. I think what they probably mean by that is that they're not necessarily going for like the washboard six pack abs, right? You want to have a tight core, but I mean, it's again like look at top two at Pittsburgh this past weekend, Amy and Ashley. I mean, they both genetically have very, very different looking cores, but they're both not like it's not like washboard six pack abs, so to say. So
I
I
would
think
disagree with that. Ashley K has chiseled abs. Like, yeah,
That is a good
like
core.
seeing her in person, like when she's lean, her abs are popping, right? So yeah,
yeah, it's all
I'd have to double
I don't know,
check that show. But then again, she did lose, so maybe that
right?
played into the decision. But um
And I know she gets critiqued a little bit on her, like kind of sometimes her vacuum and her front post, because that's another thing you don't want to see in bikini either, is you don't want to see too much like rib flare. And some girls do that. They kind of they try to suck
Yeah.
in and it flares their ribs. That's not what they want to see either. So yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last point on what bikini athletes should display is overall. So that it just this point just says overall look, hair, makeup, suit, and tan. So I think that is more so just talking about the polished overall look and like the beauty
Yeah, honestly, I
essence.
feel like these terms could be updated to be a little bit more clear, because what does that mean overall? So like
Right.
the way I describe it is a pageant look, like beautiful hair, beautiful makeup, like pageant, like stunning looking. And obviously now we're blessed to have like so many really good makeup artists and hair people. And so, that's not really an issue, especially at the pro level. Like, you've got amazing makeup, but there you'll still see some makeup and you're like, what the blue hell did you do to yourself? um
Yeah, you'll see some makeup that's very much so overdone, and then sometimes you'll even see makeup that's just really, really underwhelming. Like maybe somebody did it themselves, and like there's no pop or no contrast to their
Yes.
face, and that doesn't always look good either because it kind of just washes you out on stage.
Yeah, yeah, but I think they should define that as like an overall look of what. And I would say I
Right,
call it pageant, because you know, if your hair doesn't look done and it just doesn't, the whole thing doesn't flow and doesn't connect.
right. It's
So
like you have to think of the overall look, like all the hair, the suit, the makeup. Like think of it as like I don't know, the sprinkles to a cupcake, right? It kind of just makes everything better, like draws everything together. So, yeah, I feel like they could be a little bit more specific
I've
on
even heard
that too.
athletes tell me like they feel like once they get their makeup and their hair done, they feel like they're playing a character and it makes them feel more comfortable on stage,
Mhm.
like they're not
Yeah,
themselves. They're now playing the role of bikini pro or national level. And so it like that just it elevates their like confidence on stage. They feel better. And it makes sense. I mean, that's a big part of it. Gosh, yeah, I feel like that's not worded as well as it could be. Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Well,
little
let's go
odd,
to
but okay.
the what we don't want to see because I think there's going to be some things in here.
Yes. So, first point of what bikini athletes should not display per the NPC website is muscular density seen in a figure physique.
Yeah, you don't want to be that muscular. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
There's a big,
fair. Okay.
there's a difference.
Okay. What's next?
Yeah. Squared glutes is next. They do not want to see squared glutes.
And I'm guessing square glutes means striated glutes, like
I think it
blocked
means
out.
so much muscle that at the top they end up getting boxy versus round.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
They
I
don't,
that's
don't,
what
I
I'm
don't,
kind of
not, I
thinking.
don't, there's not many girls in the bikini
no,
division that have a problem with having too much glutes.
no.
Right, right. Yeah.
At least
And then
not
the next
now.
thing is,
Yeah.
And that could
yeah.
also come down
Well,
to
we can,
peaking as well, a
Yeah.
lot of times.
yeah, yeah. Or even posing a little bit. And the next thing is, so they don't want to see muscle separation seen in figure competitors. So let's talk about that and kind of what that means, like muscle separation.
That means a lot of muscle and low body fat. And so
Mhm.
the now the this is the one that I wanted to talk about because it can get confusing. The judges are only judging what they see on stage. I promise you, bikini pros at the highest level, when they are off stage in the gym, they are striated and separated all through their bodies. Like these girls are shredded. However, through peaking, through posing, through making sure you look right in the moment, the way I describe getting on a, pro bikini stage or getting your pro card at nationals, you want to be overly conditioned so that you can fill out and smooth the lines. It's very hard to be competitive if you're not really, really conditioned. Like these girls are lean, sub 10% many, many times. So that I think that's where it can get confusing because we can see them on Instagram and be like, oh, this girl's way too lean for bikini. Well, the judge isn't at the gym with her.
Right, right. Yeah. And oftentimes it's so hard too, because when you see people posting videos or pictures of them at the gym, they're mid pump, they have that blood growing through their muscles. So they look a little bit different. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it's an illusion compared to what they typically are going to look like in real life and, out of the gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, apples and
Yeah.
oranges, not the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You had a
And I think,
competitor last year, Evan, that was like completely shredded and you had
Yeah.
to like try
Yeah.
to soften her up a little bit.
oh, I
Yeah.
think I remember.
She came to me overly lean. And, like, this is where body dysmorphia takes over for a lot of people.
Yeah.
When you are lean and then trying to talk someone and say, hey, you are too lean, we need to get the body fat up. That's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard for a lot of people. Even if, I don't know even how to get that across them other than saying, you are not going to win because you are too lean. If we put body fat on you, you will win.
Right.
And you can't be any clearer than that. Then it's up to them. And, if they want to do it or not. And when it comes to like separation, every judge says the same thing. They don't want to see that lower hamstring chiseled out. It's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. That can be posing as well, but it's trying to find that balance of it. And again, this kind of goes back to what we're talking about before about muscle density on things. The more muscle you have, the more balance you can create with this.
Yep. Yep. And you know, this is, I mean, we're starting to get into the category of like, okay, if you got to worry about these things, you're probably a pretty damn good competitor already.
Yeah. Mhm.
But I'll say this, conditioning, meaning low body fat, stands out on stage. It's impossible not to
Mhm.
look at it. So
Yep.
don't ever go into a show being like, oh, I'm just going to go in soft and smooth. No, go in until they tell you you're too lean, then pull back. I I got beat so many times because I was, told, oh, don't bring your girls in too lean. And I didn't. And then they don't win. And I'm like, well, but last time you told me not to be, well, this was too soft. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts as a coach and as an
Yeah.
athlete to come in the right way. Um, I always will go for the little bit of extra conditioning because that's easier to fix than being a little bit too soft.
Yeah.
And it's just eye catching. Go to a show, watch the people that walk out on stage, and then go look at them up close in person. You'll see what shredded looks like. It looks like paper thin skin. It's freaking cool. It's like you're like, wow, that's amazing. And it's just impossible to take your eyes off it on stage. I mean, generally the most conditioned person is going to be one of the most competitive, if not the best athlete.
Mhm.
Bikini is the one division where, yeah, you can actually overshoot conditioning. But even then, some of those girls are so conditioned, but then they fill back out. And that's
Yeah.
that's a really nice look.
Most people never have to worry about being too conditioned. I'll be
Yeah.
freaking straight up. It's a rare people that have to worry about being too conditioned.
Yeah.
The goal for most people, the vast majority of people listening to this podcast, is be as peeled as you can,
Yeah.
because you're probably not going to be too peeled. It's a rare thing if that happens. And if the judges give you feedback, hey, you are just way too peeled, cool. Then you know how to fix that. That's not that hard.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've ever had, I've had a couple girls that just, they got shredded, and then no matter what I did, they wouldn't really fill out. They just kept dropping body fat, but that's pretty rare, man. That's really
Yeah.
rare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the next thing on the list too that I think can kind of play off of what we're talking about is they don't want to see graininess. And I feel like this is a term, like I know we all know what this means, but I feel like this is a term maybe some people don't really understand what it means. So do either of you guys have a good way to explain like what graininess looks like on a physique?
Go to Evan's page and look at his posing video from Hurricane Pro.
Yeah. Graininess is muscle maturity and being lean, being peeled. That's what it is. You're going to be grainy if you're peeled. And if you're dry, and you're peeled, then you're going to be grainy.
I feel
Now,
like
for females, you're not necessarily
graininess
going to
and
be, you're not going to be the
oh,
most grainy. Oh, something's happening.
sorry, I
Kelsey.
was gonna say, I feel like you see the most graininess. I feel like you see the most graininess, and you're probably getting ready to say this in like older athletes that have more muscle maturity, like more of your masters
Mhm.
athletes.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. And it's training over the years. That's why if you want to be a bikini athlete, you're going to reach a point to where you can't train that much. If you want to do it for a long time, you're going to reach a point where you can't train that much,
Yeah. And I
because
think
eventually it will end up being too much.
another really way to define grainy is when they can see lots of vascularity and lots of like, even not even the big vascularity, but you start to see the thin veins underneath that. And it's almost like the skin is paper thin, and you can pull it and there's no millimeters inside there. So it's literally like zero fat. And it will sometimes happen in certain areas, not others, right? So like I've seen competitors have grainy cores, but they still have soft glutes, right? So
Mhm.
it's not like they got to keep dieting to get their glutes lean, even though they're already grainy in one area. But that's, something you have to pay attention to, like based on your criteria, your division. But yeah, again, very few competitors in the bikini division are ever going to be defined as grainy. I can
Yeah.
think of a few times it's happened on pro stages, and they're like thrown right to last. They don't
Yeah.
want that.
And it's also when you're really super dry too. When you have no subcutaneous water, it's going to show more with
Yep.
that.
Yep. All right. What was the
Yeah,
next
and
one,
this isn't
Lexi?
well. One last thing. There's one more thing on the list, but this isn't explicitly on the list. But when it comes to graininess, I think we can all agree that when you see an athlete that looks kind of grainy, like it just doesn't look healthy. And I know that the judges have specifically said this. It's not on the list, but I know they say a lot of times that I can't remember where I saw it. Maybe it was on like Tyler's Instagram, but they always say like in bikini it should exude health and femininity, and I don't necessarily associate graininess with looking very healthy. So even though we know that getting stage lean as a bikini athlete isn't the epiphany of being healthy, that's kind of how it should look on stage. The muscle should look full. You should look healthy on stage, not just
Mhm.
grainy and dieted down.
Yeah.
It's really cool for men. We love that look. Like we strive for that look. That's a window of, you know, getting on stage and having that thin skin, and you can see every single muscle fiber move. We've seen it before with bikini competitors. When they walk, you can see their glutes striate. Miriam Jenkins comes to mind. They don't want that, right? And unfortunately, that's just something that we've had to deal with her. She gets lean in her glutes before some other body parts come in, so we have to like go through that. But for most people, that graininess in the glutes is going to be the last thing that comes in, so you don't really have to worry about it so much with most competitors. But for male bodybuilders, especially, if you don't have striated glutes and you want to be, don't show up. Like that's kind of the that's where this sport is. You want to be competitive at the highest level of whatever division, whatever organization you're competing in. Striated glutes is it, right? For obviously for the bikini division, it's not it.
No. No. And then well, actually the last thing on the list of what bikini athletes should not have is striations anywhere. That was the last point.
Yeah, and that's another tricky one because you will again see people on social media, on stage, that they're striated, and yet they'll do well, and you'll go, well, but I thought you weren't supposed to be striated. Well, it could be how they pose. They could hide it well. I'm not going to name names, but I've actually put tattoo cover up on a competitor before that was striated, because it's like it comes from the tanning company, and it's basically a tattoo cover up, and it creates like a little film, like, so there's ways to hide it, but striations in bikini, the most common areas are going to be the shoulders. You'll see the little fingers when they move. And then, I mean, a little bit in the quads, usually quads is more. But the thing with bikini, we don't have standard front pose where we have to stand front. So girls can get really good at hiding their flaws, how they step, how they move. Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about posing too, is that if you do have like if you have anything that we're saying that you shouldn't have, you can disguise it a little bit in posing. And also, like when it comes to striations, if you have, let's say, I know this isn't very common, but let's say your glutes are a little striated or your shoulders are a little striated, you can sometimes manipulate like your training maybe the day before to create a little bit of inflammation to kind of fuzzy out those striations. So you can play a little bit with that, along with food, of course, too.
Yeah. That's one of my strategies. And I mean, I think in the glutes, what I'll see at the pro shows is like there'll be maybe one kind of division in the upper glute when they walk only, not when they're in their pose, but you'll see them step and you'll see like a little hint of that's their
Yeah,
conditioned, but they're not overly. That's when you're like, okay, they're in a good spot. But if you see multiple divisions moving when they walk, they're probably going to get thrown right to the back of the bus.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Anything else before we kind of just go over a couple of quick terms? Anything else you guys want to comment about when it comes to the criteria at all?
No, I think we
Because
covered
that's
most of it.
My
yeah.
favorite word, Lexi, and I use it all the time, is the naked eye test. It's that thing that you
Yeah,
can't really describe, but you're watching a show, someone walks out on stage and they just have it. They're
that it
glowing, their
factor.
skin is right, they're conditioned, they're full, they're beautiful. Like you just go, whoa, like something just changed. Like the mood just, like, and it's, we talked about it at the Arnold this year, Evan. Like the girl came out in class A and we all were like, whoa, that girl's
Mhm.
good. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I mean, same with like Pittsburgh, just for the amateur, like, yeah, you can usually tell one or two girls that just, they have that it factor. And I like the term naked eye test. Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
very true. And I think confidence goes a long way too. I don't see many girls winning shows that like, I mean, you see it at amateur shows, you'll see girls kind of walk out and they just look nervous, right? They look kind of like they don't know what they're doing. And then you see the girls that walk out that are like, confident beyond measures. And the judges really notice that, and I always say being on stage, like, I don't feel like you can be too confident. That's a time where you can just be overly confident and pretty much get away with it.
Yeah, especially when you're judging a show. I used to judge shows, and you always appreciate when someone walks out and just demands your attention,
Yeah.
versus someone that comes out and you can hear them thinking, step here, turn now, flex this. Like you
Mhm.
can see their brains thinking through, versus some people just come out, eye contact, big strides, confident, walking with power, and you're just like, yes, you're doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's even what Sandy said when we did the interview with her. I think that's what she said really stands out to her on stage and kind of takes an athlete from good to great is just their confidence and how they like demand your energy and your attention the moment they step on stage.
That's another great reason to go to a show. I hear competitors all the time like, oh, I've never been to a show, but I want to do a show. Go to a show, watch your division compete, and see what you notice. You'll notice the people that stand out. They make more eye contact, they pose more confidently. Um, and that's something that you can actually practice. Like you can work on that. You know, it's weird when you walk out on stage for the first time. If you're not prepared, you've got these insanely bright lights shining down on you, seven strangers looking up at you. You can't really see anything in between there. And you're the only one on stage in a room full of people, and you're like, it all just hits you. So if you're not prepared for that, it can be kind of shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we should define just a couple of quick terms really quickly that we use a lot and that I feel like some people probably don't understand what they mean. So let's talk first about flat versus full, because I feel like we use these terms a lot. So, how would you guys, and what, because I know we have an analogy that we like to use for flat versus full. So, Evan, do you want to explain your analogy? I know you have one.
Yeah, I mean, in scientific terms, full just means your glycogen stores are full, and that the skin, the muscle is pressing against the skin, and there is not a ton of water on it. That is full. It's like blowing up a balloon, right? Like getting that balloon as full as you possibly can before it pops. That is full. Now, to be full, you have to be lean. That's also something that looks on stage. Um, so that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to use the deflated versus the inflated balloon, or like a raisin versus a grape, too. I think that's another good analogy to explain flat versus full. And obviously, you want to look full on stage. But a lot of times, in order to get full, you are going to have to probably go through a phase of depleting first, where you do appear flat in order to fill out your muscles and get that full appearance.
Yeah, if you want to, you can be not stage lean and be full and look better than being flat and not in shape. You for sure can be like that. But if you want to look your best on shape, you're gonna have to be you're gonna have to be flat, flat, flat before you get full. You're gonna have to be, because that's part of dieting down. If you want to be full the whole time during a dieting process, you are never going to be ready.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part, the hardest lesson you have to learn when you do your first prep, is that there are days where you look like 50% of yourself and you're just like
Mhm.
questioning. I think this is where a lot of people decide, I don't want to compete. You've got to go through this phase where you're not lean yet. You're leaner, but you're not lean, because once you're shredded, you look good even when you're flat. You could just hit a pose and just see everything move. But there's like this, I call it the doldrums of prep. For me, it's, where I'm not quite lean enough to see all the detail, but I'm flat so often that I'm also looking just softer. And then you cruise across to the other side of that, where you're so shredded. You look great when you're full. You still look great when you're not full. You just don't look as great, right? So yeah, that's a tough psychological pill to swallow in prep, is that, especially as men, we get so used to looking good all the time because we just eat and lift heavy. And then you've got to deal with, performance in the gym going down some days. It'll come back up, but it's like, it's the psychological battle. And I say that all the time. It's, for many people, prep is more psychological than physical. We can push our bodies through anything. It's, can we handle what we see?
For sure.
Yeah. And the worst is when you're like really depleted and prep and you're in the gym. And I mean, I feel like this happens, of course, to males, but females too, where you'll get people that like, maybe come up to you and they're like, oh man, you're really looking lean. Or I don't know. Sometimes I don't say small, but I know it always messes with my brain when they're like, oh yeah, you're really looking lean. And, at that point, you're like, do I look too lean? Do I look bad? Like it just messes with your brain so much.
It's worse for men, because definitely
Oh,
every
Yeah.
year I get the, oh, you're looking a little skinny, or you're looking thinner. Those are not the words you want to hear.
No, it's not.
I hate the word skinny. Yeah. I always like when I'm having maybe my worst body image days in prep, like feeling really, really small, those are always the days where I like throw on like a hoodie and just cover up because I'm like, oh, I don't want to deal with other people looking at me, or especially because like I go to Crunch most of the time and there's a lot of non-competitors there. So if they see somebody who is like peeled, that's gonna just naturally draw a lot of attention. And I just don't want to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What's another term?
Um, Flat versus full, we just covered that. I'm trying to think. I feel like we had a couple of other terms, but I'm totally drawing a blank.
That's the big one. And I think we covered most of them in the criteria portion.
Yeah, grainy, density. Yeah, I think we did cover most
Yeah,
of
well, we can
them.
talk about like maybe some common judges feedback that we get.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
think density is a good word, like how that's used in context.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good analogy to explain like muscle density because honestly, to get muscle density, it requires what a lot of people don't want to hear, just time. Time,
Mhm.
um, it's not something that you see like, a lot of times you're not going to see a lot of muscle density in like a first time competitor unless they've been lifting for years and years and years and years, but you're just going to see more muscle density as your, maturity in the gym. The longer you train, you're going to see more muscle
Mhm.
density, but I'm trying to think of a good analogy for it.
Look, it's just time. It's how long you've held the muscle, how long you've held the muscle, how long you've trained, the denser you get. I don't really know another way to put it. And that's natural, enhanced everything, guys.
Yeah.
It's just time. You cannot speed that process up.
No, and
You
it's
can't do it.
also there are some people that are genetically going to be more dense than you, and I think that freaks people out the first time they see
Mhm.
someone that's younger than them that has more dense muscle. There's some genetics involved there, like we all knew somebody growing up that could bench 315 in high school, and it was like, what the heck, right?
Mhm.
So, the part that can be confusing, I think, for competitors is when after a show they're told they need more density. Judges don't know how you peaked. They don't know how you looked 3 days ago. They don't know how you look tomorrow. They're judging what they see on stage. I've seen a lot of situations where someone looked less dense than they were because they were dehydrated, pulled water out of their body. Remember, muscle is like 75. You're the smart one here, Lexi. What is 75% water?
I think yeah, you're right on the ball. I think it's like 70% water.
Yeah, I'm very smart too. So now imagine you take that out of the muscle. When people take diuretics and they pull out the sodium and they cut their carbohydrates, you're flattening a muscle out. We just described what this flatness is. Well, now it's not going to look as dense. So you can change the density of a muscle based on how you peak. However, if you filled out and you're still not muscular enough, then you just need more damn muscle.
Right, right. And that's where I think that judging feedback can be, for a competitor, can be a little confusing. So I always say, first rule of thumb, if you're going to get judges' feedback, like in person, put on like a little voice memo on your phone. And that way you can give that to your coach because getting feedback of like, oh, you need to be fuller, well, that can mean two things. That can mean maybe you just didn't peak properly, or that could also mean that you just need more muscle, right?
Yeah.
Same with like a judge that may say, oh, you need to be leaner. Well, for some, especially amateur competitors, they get as lean as they can, and then it's like if they get any leaner, they're going to look like a string bean on stage. Therefore, they just need to go add more muscle, so that way they don't have to get as lean to see that muscle pop, right? So it can be hard just because judges' feedback can mean a couple of different things. So that's why I always say do a voice memo. That way you can share it with your coach, and they can give you more of that objective feedback.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. And that's where the judges really come into play, because I've gotten that feedback before and literally did the next show, and then the judge was like, I told you to stop competing. I was like, no, you didn't. They said, yeah, I said you need more density. I was like, oh, that's what you meant. Okay, so
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like that feedback, to get from judges of like to stop competing. I feel like as a competitor, some competitors may take that in a negative light, but honestly, I'd prefer to have a judge tell me to stop competing rather than for me to keep getting back on stage and just doing worse and worse and worse, right? If a judge is telling you to stop competing, they're not saying stop competing for forever, but they're just saying stop now. That way you can improve and come back and do better, right? Not continue to just do worse. So I think that that's hard feedback to receive, but I mean, it's good, tough love that, you know, a lot of times is needed.
And also too, like a lot of times judges won't be as direct as you need to stop competing. So ask the judge direct questions.
Yeah.
Say, hey, should I keep going or should I take a break? They'll answer that question.
Yeah.
for
You can, they'll say like, oh, what show are you thinking about doing? I'm thinking about doing the show in 3 weeks. They'll probably be like, oh, I'm judging that show. It's a smaller show. You might place better, even just how you look now. Or they might say, no, you do not need to go to nationals yet. That is not where you belong. So yeah, that's another, you know, most of these judges are judging at multiple levels and they can tell you based on where you're going, what you should be doing.
Yep.
And that's a big part of it. Yeah. You don't generally get better in prep, right? You get, once you reach your best in prep, you're just going to be maintaining thereabouts. You're not going to see big changes. So yeah, that's
Right.
the judges are doing you a favor when they say that. It might feel like a kick in the nuts, or Lexi, I don't know what the equivalent of that is, like a punch in the gut. But
Yes.
like it can hurt in the moment, but I promise you, you know, it happened to me once. I had literally a very big judge say, I don't want to see you on the stage again, to one of my clients. And I was like, damn, we just did pretty good. And he was like, yes, but it's enough. I need to see you with more muscle, not this year. And I was like, okay. And looking back, I'm like, that was the absolute right decision. I just wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I feel like the judges, I mean, if you're on stage all the time and you don't listen to their feedback, they're going to pick up and notice that, you know, time after time after time when they see you,
Yeah.
if they see you progressively getting worse, that does not look good.
You see it all the time with competitors competing early in the season, doing lots of shows. And then later in the season, you're like, just something's off. They look a little tired. They can't get as full. They've lost some muscle, whatever it is. You just start to fade. Being stage lean is very hard on you physically, mentally. And I think it's exciting because you get so much positive feedback. The people in the gym see you, the people on Instagram see you, the people on YouTube are like, oh man, you look amazing. But it just, you start to feel like a ghost. You just start to feel like, oh man, I'm going through the motions. My sleep is interrupted. You know, it just starts to wear you down, and you know, you just got to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it hurts sometimes too, just like sit your tailbone, your glutes, I don't know. I always feel so like fragile in the gym too. You know, I don't know. Sometimes it's like you're afraid to lift really, really heavy because you're like, oh, I'm so tiny and fragile. So yeah, it looks cool, but it doesn't feel as cool as it looks.
Yeah. It's like, what's that analogy where they say you can put a frog in water and he'll die if you turn it up to boiling, because he just stays in there because he doesn't realize how gradual the heat is increasing. It's the same thing in prep. In prep, I'm always like, man, I feel great. I feel great. By the end of prep, I'm like, I still feel great. And then 3 months later, when I put on some body fat and I'm strong again, I'm like, I can't believe I thought I felt great.
Oh, I know. You normalize it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. It's like I see it all the time too with like just you know, prep aside, but people who normalize like the stress they have on their plate. Like I'll talk to clients all the
Yeah.
time and be like, you know, how are your stress levels? And they're like, oh, I'm good. I'm not stressed. But then come to find out they have so much stress. They've just kind of normalized it for so
Yep.
long. So yeah, that same phenomenon happens in prep for sure.
Yeah, I always see that with competitors that travel for a show and they fly the day before and they get a hotel room and they'll drop like a couple pounds. And I'm like, what happened? They're like, I guess the kids didn't wake me up. I didn't have to feed the dog. My boss wasn't yelling at me. And like, I'm like, yeah, you just have a built up level of stress in your day. And it was
Right.
just all of a sudden just gone. So.
Yep, that whoosh effect. Yep. Yeah. Well, any other terms or any other last minute, you know, things on this topic, or you guys think we hit it all pretty well?
I think we hit
Nothing
pretty
that
good.
comes to mind. Yep.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think we nailed it. Awesome.
All right.
Well, reminder, get your tickets for Texas if you haven't already, because by this time when this podcast comes out, they'll have been live for like 5 days. And I'm sure we have a good chunk already sold. So
I already had a couple of my clients that went last year.
yeah.
I mean, I don't want to set any expectations, but 2 girls that went to the thing last year turned pro at nationals. Just saying.
Ooh,
Coincidence
okay.
or not? Inquiring minds want to know.
It will be fun. It'll be my first time in Dallas, so I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, I think the show will be amazing this year too, since it's going to be like a little mini expo.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be mini. I don't know if you haven't been to Texas. They don't do mini.
Oh, that's right. Everything is bigger in
Texas
Texas. Yeah.
is big. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
Freddie
right.
and Bernadette and that crew, they don't do little.
No, it'll be fun.
No, it'll be
Absolutely.
good. Texas right now, I believe, is the home of bodybuilding. There are more NPC cards in Texas than any other state, and those shows are packed. Like, yeah,
They're
yeah,
amazing. I mean, to this day, I mean, I may change my mind after the show that we're going to go to for the seminar, but to this day, Republic of Texas is probably my favorite show that
great
I've
show.
ever been to. It's just a fun experience. And I know this sounds really silly, but even just the things like as small as how they had like the lit up letters, like the big letters that said, I think Galvanized Productions or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it's just, they put such a good show, and it's such a great experience for the athlete and the competitor, and I think that that goes a long way.
Say it all the time. It should feel like an event, and sometimes the shows are underwhelming because they don't put a lot of value into the production. So yeah, Texas is definitely, crushing it right now. So I'll be excited for that seminar. So definitely do that. Also, our 8-week summer sculpt is kicking off in June. So that's on the Pro Physique page. Signups are ready. I think things will go out on the 20th. Meal plans and training plans. We've added a bunch more as well this time around. And the private group will be open soon too. So we haven't announced the winners of our 90-day transformation challenge it just ended, but let me tell you, I did all the voting. That we had a team of people voting. I was blown the freak away. Well, I cannot wait to show you guys these transformations. Just phenomenal.
Awesome.
So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So, and if you saw my funny reel today, I'm going to be posting more like content like that.
I loved that. That was fun. That was a great transition.
Yeah, me and George are going to have some fun with some more of those.
Good.
Good.
All right, y'all. Until next week.
Have a good one.
Guys, bye.